It's a good time now to bring in Chicago-based attorney Andrew Weisberg. He is a criminal defense lawyer who was previously a prosecutor in the state's attorney's office. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
So Jussie Smollett faces felony disorderly conduct charges. Bail, as we just heard, set at $100,000. Can you tell us why prosecutors would charge him with that? Why it is a felony and not a misdemeanor, for example?
Well, so the disorderly conduct term is kind of misleading because typically disorderly conduct in Illinois and in most places is somebody gets drunk in a bar, makes a scene, and they charge them with disorderly conduct. For whatever reason, the felony version of disorderly conduct involves making a false report. So if, in my opinion, had this been cut off much sooner, had he quickly come forward and said, you know what, this was a hoax, before all the man hours had been put in, I think they probably would have charged some sort of misdemeanor. But because he allowed it to go on for weeks and weeks, I think they were left with no choice but to charge this. I myself have represented a couple of individuals in very similar cases, not obviously as high profile as this, but people who had made up allegedly robberies or beatings and then had been charged with the Class 4 felony disorderly conduct.
And so given that, what kind of punishment could he face?
Well, so technically, if you read the law, it says 1 to 3 years in prison with a fine up to $25,000 or a combination. In my experience, I wouldn't expect him to serve prison time. Generally, the Class 4 felony, which is what he was charged with, that is our lowest level felony. And it's pretty rare that somebody with a clean record or even a little blemish here or there would actually do jail or prison time on a Class 4 felony. So I would expect, if I had to predict, that he'll end up with some sort of probation, possibly have to get a mental evaluation, and potentially have to pay restitution for the cost of the investigation.
We have heard of the Chicago police alluding to that. Is that the kind of thing that's unusual, that he might have to foot the bill for those man hours, taking police off the street in this case?
Well, I don't think it's unusual. I mentioned I had a case, and I had one recently, where it was just about a one-day investigation for the police to quickly discover what they believed to be a fraudulent claim of a crime. And in that case, the cost of the investigation was around $8,400. So I can only imagine what 3 or 4 weeks with 12 detectives around the clock would have to be in the hundreds of thousands. I'm sure that they being the prosecutors, will be asking for that.
It recently came out that Smollett has a criminal record that included giving false information to police previously. How will this impact the punishment he receives, do you think, and could that even prejudice a trial?
Well, it's definitely not great. I can tell you that in Chicago, if you handle criminal cases, you come across people with very significant criminal records. My understanding of his case, it was about 10 years ago, a couple of misdemeanors from California. So in my mind, he doesn't have a terrible record, one blemish from 10 years ago. However, that does matter. And the fact that allegedly in that case, he made some false claims to the police. I suppose if he testified at trial, if this case were to proceed to trial, they may be able to bring that in to show that he may not be trustworthy on the witness stand. But I think overall, I don't know if that one case from 10 years ago is going to be the difference between him receiving prison time or getting some sort of probation.
Final thought, given Chicago is known for its high rate of violence and given your past as a state's attorney, how much of a distraction was this for police?
Well, I mean, it's a significant force. There's thousands of police officers and a lot of detectives. However, there's also a lot of violent crime that needs to be investigated. And my fear, and I think the fear of most people who work in the system, realize that when you take these detectives off the street, and they've been talking about around the clock, but obviously guys have to sleep. So I assume there's been more than a dozen detectives on the case. It's a problem because I'm sure they're some of the best detectives too, and they're not able to investigate murders, rapes, robberies, and more significant, violent crimes. So I think it's a problem, and crimes may have been going unsolved for that period of time.
I appreciate your insights on this. Thanks for your time today.
Anytime. Thank you.
Andrew Weisberg is a criminal defense lawyer in Chicago.